Well, Benita, you just reported, I think we're still getting our arms around exactly the rationale why, and that has some importance, but the headline is already out there, and that's what really matters. And as had been expected, this sets up the real clash between Israel's Supreme Court and between this new Israeli government. Again, the court disqualifying Aryeh Deri from serving as a minister. Members of this coalition, Benita, have made it very, very clear that they want to see to it that Deri becomes a minister one way or another. Now, exactly how the government will respond will depend critically on what that rationale is. We're still getting our arms around it. We'll have to be going through the decision to find out and to see what the coalition's next steps will need to be. But the fact of his being disqualified means that we now have this very, very grave difference of opinion between the government and the Supreme Court that is going to have to be sorted out. And members of this government, Benita, have made it very, very clear they want to see to it that they win. And in order to do so, again, we have to emphasize, depending on exactly what the rationale was, they may need to quickly implement parts of their judicial overhaul, which could have consequences far beyond the case of Aryeh Deri. Because, for example, if it is the case that Aryeh Deri has been disqualified using the standard of reasonableness, something we've been talking so much about the last few days, a standard that Israeli courts have used in recent years or decades in order to disqualify government decisions, well, as part of its reform plan or overhaul, the government wants to pull the rug out from under the feet of the court, essentially say, you can't strike down decisions because of reasonableness. This will give them an incentive, and many have been very open in saying so, to legislate that provision very, very quickly. And once that's done, it affects, of course, not just this decision, but the full range of decisions, potentially, depending on what the legislation is. And we've seen some new moves in recent days by various important key members of the coalition that will affect decisions far beyond this. So what this could do, Benita, again, very important to emphasize, depending on exactly what the rationale that the court has used, is that it may turbocharge part, at least, of the legislative process of pushing through the overhaul.
You're raising so many questions that need to be answered there, Owen. Lots to discuss. Of course, we need to know if he is disqualified, who would replace him in the positions that he does hold right now. But before we even get to that, before this ruling, Shas members of his party, Aryeh Deri's party, had said that Benjamin Netanyahu knows that if Aryeh Deri is not in the government, there is no government. Now we've just found out in this breaking news development that he is disqualified. What exactly does that sentiment mean right now? Break it down for us.
Well, what it means, Benita, is that the government is going to see to it that he's not disqualified. I mean, the immediate question for Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, for that matter, for Aryeh Deri, is, does Deri resign? Does he follow the court's decision even though he objects to it, doesn't like it, and wants to find a way to essentially trump the court's ruling? Does he, in the meantime, pending that legislation, voluntarily and of his own volition, resign in deference and in respect to the court's ruling, abiding by it? Or, for that matter, if Deri refuses to resign, does Netanyahu fire him? Again, saying, well, I don't like the court's ruling, I despise it, I'm going to find a way for our coalition to, again, take away the tools from the court in order to do this one way or another, again, importantly, depending on what the court's rationale was. But I'm going to fire him because I'm going to abide by the court as having the power to do this. Or are Netanyahu and or Deri going to defy the court? Essentially, Benita, setting up a kind of full-on constitutional clash, at least until there is legislation that resolves it, however controversial that legislation might be. And then looking a few steps ahead of that, what does the court then do with that legislation? But that, I think, for the moment, is getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Again, in the immediate term, the decision is, does Aryeh Deri resign? If he doesn't resign, does Benjamin Netanyahu fire him? And again, depending on the rationale, what does this mean for the short-term process that the coalition uses to push through the overhaul? And what does that mean for the kind of provisions that get implemented and what that means for Israel's legal system, which, of course, is a question much bigger than Aryeh Deri. Politically, Benita, you're right. The minister from the Shas party has said, if Deri's not a minister, we're out. We don't have any reason to be here. And in and of itself, I think one can understand that. Deri is the leader of the Shas party, is the face of it, and has been for decades. Hundreds of thousands of people voted for it. One last point that's important to put out there. It's not a legal point. It's a political point. Deri serving as a minister is uniformly, poll after poll shows, unpopular among Israeli voters, a vast majority of whom say they don't think it is proper. But, of course, there is a Shas party with a strong number of seats in this parliament, And those people who voted will want Deri to be a minister and will see it as being their right. Of course, the Israeli Supreme Court has weighed in otherwise.
Israel's top court disqualifying the appointment of Aryeh Deri. That is the breaking news transpiring just moments ago. Thank you so much for your reaction, Senior Diplomatic Correspondent Owen Alterman. We will be coming back to you. And, of course, we'll be looking at the details as the details of the ruling are released right now. For more, political correspondent Batya Levinthal joins me here in studio. And what a moment in the political landscape. A lot of speculation about what would happen, what the High Court would do right now. Breakdown, as Owen did. A lot could happen. What is your take right now?
Speculation, yes. Surprise, no. I don't think anyone can be surprised with the ruling, given the fact that it really highlights the disparities between the justice system in Israel and the political system, which we have seen protests over in the last couple of weeks. They are clearly at odds with one another. It was evident, at least from my view, that this was not going to be a surprise, that they were going to make a ruling that may have not been on the same par with the government's thinking. But again, it does bring up interesting questions, and more so than questions, I think some of the facts are very interesting to lay out. A lot of the news media and a lot of the articles are pointing out that this is because of Deri's repeated offense. Now, again, this has nothing to do with convictions that he has been led to in the past. We are not talking about the two prior convictions. We are talking about the most current one being his tax offense, of which was a suspended sentence and of which he took a plea bargain deal with regards to the Knesset. That is what it is. It's got nothing to do with the repeated offenses, but more on what's happened in the past year. And so to put that in perspective, this is very much, I mean, again, you can argue this from both sides. A lot of his voters are saying at the end of the day, he's already sort of taken a step back, being that he is not serving as the financial minister in which he wanted to. That's Bezalel Smotrich's post, at least for the next 2 years. So what do his tax offenses have to do with being an interior minister or a health minister? Then again, the other side of this argument could be, well, once, you break the law and once you are committed of a crime, you should not be able to serve in the government, period. And so a watershed moment, crunch time, yes, the questions now are going to be what happens going forward. Currently, he's not going to be able to serve as a minister, and so until the government or Benjamin Netanyahu decides what they would like to do in terms of whether he resigns, whether they fire him, whether they fight the court ruling, whether they end up putting in the override clause as quick as possible, the current stature is that they are going to need to put someone in place to serve as the interior and health minister, because Aryeh Deri, as of right now, cannot.
And we certainly will be watching as well to see what the political reaction is, not only out of Jerusalem, but also in the streets. The public have been protesting just in recent days. It will be interesting to see the reaction as it unfolds in the country as well. We'll be breaking it all down. Thank you so much, Batya Levinthal, here in studio on this breaking news